come to him shortly. And the reason we are speaking to him is because this is the governor of the Bank of Ghana, speaking at the Governor's Day of the Chartered Institute of Bankers, Ghana. And this is what he says about so far, the things we've said. He says central banking has never been the same. And continues, before the financial crisis, the quintessential task of central banks was straightforward, keeping inflation within a tight range throughout the control of short-term interest. However, he pointed out, in a world of poly-crisis, central banks have found themselves broadening monetary policy formulation beyond interest rates to include the deployment of balance sheets in a variety of unconventional monetary policies. Thus, the crisis exposed a chasm between the theory and the practice. And continues to say, in 2022 economic and liquidity crisis, the central bank would not have acted differently but played its role as an automatic stabilizer to avoid pushing the economy to a tipping point which possibly could have spilled into social upheavals, as was the case in Sri Lanka. It is very, very clear that only a central bank that has been prudently running, built buffers, and well positioned can step in to support an economy from collapse. It is therefore most appropriate, I believe, to state that Ghanaians should rather applaud and commend the resilience of the Bank of Ghana. It is therefore most appropriate, I believe, to state that Ghanaians should rather applaud and commend the resilience of the Bank of Ghana. Dr. Salifu is an organization management expert. He is one of those who has been critical of the approach of the central bank. Doc, good morning, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for inviting me.
I hope you're well.
Good morning. I'm doing great. I hope you are doing well also.
I am also doing well. In fact, if you read first, if you start from the quote of the governor, it says, in 2022 economic and liquidity crisis, the central bank would not have acted differently but played its role as an automatic stabilizer to avoid pushing the economy to a tipping point which possibly could have spilled into social upheavals, as was the case in Sri Lanka. It looks like they are saying that we would not have acted differently, we would have done the same things. What do you say?
Yeah, one thing about this government is that they are so glued to explanations and attributions instead of solutions. Because people are not just complaining about only a particular action, but there are a variety of them that did not make sense to Ghanaians. The central bank is supposed to be resilient, but the central bank's resilience is not our issue. But the economic resilience is what should be the focus. In the first place, if the bank was basically performing its role as a stabilizer of the economy, they should have put in place measures to make sure that they can perform that role without creating a deficit of about 60 billion. When they performed it, there were a lot of other consequences to it. And then negative equity of 55 billion. When you solve one problem and create a problem of that magnitude, you are not solving the problem. Anybody could have done that. So I don't know where he's calling for people to praise him on. And also, if you look at the reckless expenditures that the bank made, expenditure alone was amounting to almost 600 billion. And 600 million. That's so huge if you compare it to other organizations. So the central bank governor is still doing the same explanation. And then he flouted laws and printed currency. When you print currency in the middle of crisis, you are escalating it. Our inflation was coming from multiple sources. One, it was driven by the printing of currency, which he did. Number two, the haircut that he keep using as the basis for the bank incurring the 60 billion is not adding up. Because if you go around absorbing the liabilities of other organizations like Cocoa Board and then use it to explain why the Bank of Ghana had to make about 60 billion losses, it doesn't make sense, because Cocoa Board has their own books. And in their books is reflected, whatever the losses they made is reflected over there. So it's basic accounting. And the Bank of Ghana is just trying to save himself. So what should be, looked at is, number one, nobody is contesting the idea that the bank is supposed to help to stabilize the economy when the need be, because that is one of their cardinal functions. And they normally will use the monetary policy to deal with inflation. But you see, in the developing country, it's always complex. When you only focus on monetary policy, yes, because monetary policy in developing country is very different from developed country. For example, if you increase interest rates in Ghana, it's not going to impact the ordinary consumer. Why? Because we don't spend credit. We spend cash. So I wouldn't go to bank and say, oh, because interest rates have come down or they've gone up, I'm not going to borrow. 0.5. If interest rate comes down, I will run to the bank to take a credit card like in the West. So it's a textbook solution. And the bank keep doing that. Currently, the interest rates are maintained, I think, at 30%, the policy rate, thinking that, when they increase it, then it means it's going to incentivize people not buying and then creating more inflation. So, but if you look at it, how many people still go to the bank, take loans, and then buy goods and services in the market? So there are a lot of things that are going on. And they told us that their inflation is from supply chain sources. Why? Ukraine and Russia war is ongoing. Therefore, if that were to be the case, then the inflation would have been supply driven, because you don't have enough goods. So demand is not being able to be met. And therefore, prices are going up. So there are a lot of things he's putting out there, and Ufuriata is putting out there, that keep contradicting the reality. The reality is that we import everything. Our CD has depreciated significantly because of some actions. The energy sector is taking a lot because we import everything. You look at poultry industry is dead. We have to import everything. So all these things are competing for the little foreign exchange that we have. We have weakened the banks. The banks got a lot of haircut because the bank couldn't resist whatever the government was recommending. Why, if they did it and they couldn't do the external, because the external cannot take the nonsense that they are putting on the table. You buy, bonds, and now they're telling you that you're going to lose significant part of that. And investor confidence is going to continue to dwindle, because no investor will look at this experience and go, invest in Ghana, because their examples are not too good to make anybody want them to deal with their investments. So they've caused us a lot of mess. He needs to own up and just say, look, certain things we shouldn't have done. We should have prepared ourselves, say that even if we undertake that responsibility of helping to stabilize the economy, because we always carry budget deficits. So if Kenneth Furata cannot borrow, then he runs to the Bank of Ghana and say, okay, print more currency. Then they print it. This is what really ruined a champion's government, because He couldn't borrow. They started printing currency. And quantitative easing is one of the, actions that when you take, is going to result in higher inflation and destroy your economy. And that's what they did.
Because he suggests that but for their intervention at the Bank of Ghana, the situation could have spilled into social upheavals, as was the case in Sri Lanka. But you are suggesting that they are actually the ones who worsened the situation?
Yeah, when you're dealing with the economy, you're dealing with long-term and short-term issues. In Sri Lanka, they demonstrated the government out. Didn't we see demonstrations on our streets? So which social upheaval did they prevent? Because it was building up. And you see, Ghanaians became tired of military interventions. So anytime they start this, I think the part of us that says, look, you need this democracy, keep coming in. And that really saved our country. It's not whatever he did. Whatever he did, don't we have the worst situation today? Corruption alone takes 3 billion every year. They can't fight that. He himself, the reckless expenditures that he made alone is enough to cause the bank's balance sheet to get into crisis. Because you use $130 million cedis to do vehicle maintenance. From my calculation, you can buy about 20 Rolls Royce with that amount of money. I'm telling you, at the time our country is in crisis, you are putting up a new building. So for the governor of Bank of Ghana, he's, prosecution material waiting to happen. Because at some point you will have to answer questions for certain type of decisions. We have let a lot of things to just go down the drain without us acting on it. So Sri Lanka's situation was mixed up. Apart from the economic issue, there were political issues. And Ghana could go into that because we have the crisis that Sri Lanka ran into. We are in the same thing, situation. The finance minister is struggling now to keep our lights on. And potentially, if the lights goes off, the assembly plant is going to shut down because I don't know where they can come out with the money based on what I read in the press about the agreement. So the Sri Lanka situation is already in Ghana. The only thing is that we have left the president. The president has not been demonstrated out. But what is going on is the worst social crisis you can ever have a government create for people of a country. Because everything seems to going down the drain. Cocoa board syndicated loans are choking us. We have energy sector loans that are also, crying for solutions. So there are a lot of crises that their action plunged Ghana into. So he didn't save anything. What he saved is just window dressing, because in the long term, the problems that he said he solved will continue to exist. Our addiction to import is not getting resolved. Our currency, they use the little reserves that we have to keep the currency at a slower depreciation rate. But slower depreciation rate or faster depreciation rate is still depreciating. So every single day, real income is diminishing. Workers' salaries are not going up. It went up only in the middle of the crisis, 10%. So how can you match it up to 54% inflation? So the crisis we have now is the worst. And he's saying that he's the best governor. He's the best governor, central government. How does he know? Every country's crisis is different. What would the Togo governor say? Because Togo doesn't have all the higher figures that we have. So if he's praising himself, he has to look at himself in the mirror and see whether he feels that he himself, his condition is reflecting what he's claiming.
So instead of applause, you say he's a candidate for prosecution.
I think so. You see, we don't hold people accountable. And this is where our country's problem is emanating from. Because certain type of decisions should not be. You see, you made the decision without consulting Parliament, and you say, "Oh, it's a good decision. Why didn't you send it to Parliament?" And then the other people with knowledge of the economy will say, and then approve. You have explanation for that. Everything they have an explanation. So we never elected them to provide explanations, but to provide solutions. So the central governor, bank governor, for me, should be seriously looked at. There should be investigation to investigate most of these things. Whilst he's acting a very competent person, Cocoa Board chief executive is doing the same thing. So all these chief executives, for me, they need to answer serious questions because they lead the organizations. And if we don't put some prosecution in place, because from where I sit, most of what he did can be the sources of prosecution. And if we do that, then we can clean our slate and begin to make tangible progress. Because he has caused our country serious damages. And it's going to be with us for a long time. The consequences we have to bear every single day.
And Doc, since you're on the line, let me just ask you to conclude. Today, there will be a decision taken on the policy statement of the budget, the policy and statement. In fact, last week, it couldn't go ahead because the majority once again staged the walkout. And today, they've had enough time perhaps to rally their numbers. But the minority says they will oppose it at all costs. Where do you stand on it?
Well, instead of us running our country on realities and strategies, we will now run it on tricks. Parliament know very well that the budget they put before, the government knows that the budget they sent to Parliament is not a good budget. It's not going to help the people of Ghana. And if they want a balanced, budget to have support, they are in office. They should be negotiating with the minority, because the issues the minority is raising, they are not solving that. They're just trying to impose the budget on Ghanaians. So who do they represent? Ghanaians are going to suffer from the consequences of whatever action they are taking in Parliament. And then the majority is supporting that. They always support what the majority of Ghanaians don't support. Now, the minority should hold on to that and try to fight to make sure the budget doesn't go through. Because the taxes they introduce, I don't see cut in expenditure. We have created a class society where every budget is protecting the status quo. Everything in the budget seems not to be reflecting the attempt to achieve fiscal consolidation that IMF keeps singing about. We brought IMF to town, but we are completely not getting ourselves detaxed from this high expenditure and all that. And government action is even escalating with the high taxes, huge waivers that they are giving to their own party members and cronies. Some of these things legally can, we will hold them accountable one day, I pray. But the minority should continue the fight to make sure that the budget is revised completely. And once it is rejected, it will be the beginning of looking seriously at the budget. Because the budget is not going to help Ghanaian worker, it's not going to help anybody. But it's rather going to cause a lot of problems, the exemptions, the ban on importation. And MPP has one serious deficiency. I've seen incompetent people, but it looks like theirs is an escalated one. You see, anything they're coming up with, they don't pilot. They don't say, okay, let's do this first and that. You sent a lot of items to Parliament for them to ban the importation of this and that and a tall list. Why not start just doing few and see how it is going to work? and then you move to another. But they send a lot of items, and they themselves will help to break most of the, the same law if it is passed. Because you can do import restriction, but you have to look at the consequences. Before that happens, if you do it immediately, then it's going to start causing economic problems because you don't produce enough. So I think the opposing the budget, and they should stand their grounds. That will bring it to the table, and then public opinion will also begin to look at some items seriously, because tax is an economic killer. When you tax people, what it means is that you are increasing cost of production. Therefore, people who produce will have to factor that in. Transportation costs can go up, which affect the poor also, and then many other things will happen. And it may not mean that your revenue is going to grow, because when you increase taxes and people cannot pay, how do you increase your revenue? So we need to target it. And I always say that certain type of taxes we need to consolidate and then also reduce. Look at fuel prices. Taxes on fuel, 6 of them. How do someone produce with all these taxes and compete with another person in producing in an economy where they don't have to pay all these taxes? So we are putting ourselves at a difficult competitive stage, which for me is a serious problem. So minority, I think, did the right thing, and they should continue. The public is behind them, and I think their position makes a lot of sense.